Baseball, the national pastime. By the year 1914, the game had already captured America's heart. But beneath the crack of the bat and the cheers of the crowd, the sport was tightly controlled. To major leagues, the American and the National ran baseball like a fortress, locking players into contracts with a clause that chained them for life, the reserve clause. But then came a rebellion. A league that dared to challenge the empire. A league that promised freedom for the players and competition for the fans. It was called the Federal League. The year was 1913. A group of wealthy businessmen and restless investors, frustrated with the closed doors of Major League Baseball, came together. They formed an outlaw league, starting as a minor operation with teams in Indianapolis, Cleveland, and Pittsburgh. But by the winter of 1913 into 1914, they had grown bolder. Backed by money and ambition, the Federal League declared itself a third major league, ready to rival the establishment. Their plan was simple: build clubs in major cities, recruit discontented players with promises of higher salaries, and most of all, break the iron grip of the reserve clause. The Federal League struck fast. Across the winter of 1913, they raided the rosters of the American and National Leagues. Pitchers, sluggers, even managers, all lured by the promise of freedom. Stars like Three Finger Brown, the legendary Cubs pitcher, and Joe Tinker, shortstop of Chicago's famous Tinker to Evers two-chance double-play trio, signed contracts. Newspapers buzzed, fans argued, was this the birth of true free agency, half a century before its time? The Federal League offered players not only better pay but also multi-year contracts, something unheard of in the majors. By spring of 1914, 8 Federal League teams had emerged: the Baltimore Terrapins, the Brooklyn Tip-Tops, the Chicago Whales, the Pittsburgh Rebels, the St. Louis Terriers, the Indianapolis Hoosiers, the Kansas City Packers, and the Buffalo Blues. They built new ballparks: Baltimore's Terrapin Park, Chicago's Weeman Park, which would later become the legendary Wrigley Field. These weren't minor league outposts, they were bold statements. On April 13, 1914, the Federal League season began. Crowds filled the stands. The rebellion was real. But legitimacy came with resistance. The established leagues struck back, mocking the Federals as amateurs. Umpires were inconsistent. Travel was grueling. Newspapers aligned with the majors painted the Federals as a circus act. Yet the league pressed on. In Indianapolis, the Hoosiers captured the pennant, led by Benny Koff, called the Ty Cobb of the Federal League. Fans adored him, and Koff's success gave the league credibility. But beneath the surface, trouble was brewing. Teams overspent on salaries, revenues couldn't match expenses. Owners fought over money, and attendance lagged behind expectations. By the fall of 1914, the Federal League had proven it could compete, but at a cost. Franchises were bleeding money. The Indianapolis Hoosiers, despite winning the championship, couldn't survive. The team was dismantled, moved to Newark, New Jersey, for the following season. The majors, meanwhile, sat back, waiting, confident that the Outlaw League would collapse under its own weight. But the Federals had one more card to play. In the winter of 1914, as America watched from the sidelines, the Federal League launched a bold attack not on the field, but in the courts. They filed an antitrust lawsuit against organized baseball itself, claiming the sport was an illegal monopoly. It was a case that could shake the foundation of baseball and even threaten the future of the game. The Federal League had survived its first season, but in 1915, it would gamble everything on the field, in the courtroom, and in the hearts of fans. Next time, the final year of the Federal League, and the shocking outcome that would echo through baseball history for the next century. By the spring of 1915, the Federal League had become more than just a curiosity. It was a full-fledged challenge to Major League Baseball. The league still had 8 teams, but the financial strain on owners was immense. Salaries were high, travel was expensive, and every team fought for fans in cities already loyal to the American and National Leagues. The season opened with a sense of defiance. In Chicago, the Whales Weeman Park welcomed thousands of fans, while the Baltimore Terrapins drew crowds hungry for competition and novelty. Players, many of whom had risked leaving the majors, were now stars in their own right, showing that the Federal League could produce baseball at the highest level. But behind the cheers, tension simmered. The league's owners quarreled over money and strategy. Some franchises were barely holding together. Attendance in certain cities lagged far behind expectations. The Federal League had made its bold claim, but the reality of running a professional sports league was far harsher than anyone had imagined. Meanwhile, the antitrust lawsuit filed in the winter of 1914 loomed over everything. The Federal League claimed that organized baseball was an illegal monopoly, using its reserve clause and exclusive control of stadiums and players to crush competition. The case, filed in federal court, captured national attention. Newspapers debated its merits. Fans watched, intrigued by a battle that was no longer just on the diamond. As the 1915 season progressed, teams competed fiercely. The Indianapolis Hoosiers, now relocated to Newark, struggled to find a fan base. The Chicago Whales and the St. Louis Terriers emerged as dominant forces. But victories on the field could not mask the league's mounting financial problems. Owners desperately sought new investors, hoping to sustain their dream. Off the field, negotiations quietly began with Major League Baseball. The powerful owners of the American and National Leagues realized that the Federal League might collapse under its own financial weight, but they also feared the legal implications of the antitrust suit. Behind closed doors, deals were being proposed that would quietly absorb some Federal League assets and dismantle the rest. By late summer, it became clear the Federal League could not survive on its own. Teams folded, relocated, or were bought out. Promises to players were broken. Dreams of a permanent third major league faded as quickly as they had appeared. Finally, in February of 1916, the league officially dissolved. The antitrust lawsuit would drag on for years, culminating in the Supreme Court ruling in 1922 that baseball was exempt from antitrust laws. The Federal League, though short-lived, had left a permanent mark. It forced Major League Baseball to confront player salaries, competition, and the reserve clause, sowing seeds that would eventually lead to free agency decades later. The players returned to the established leagues. The fans returned to the familiar stadiums. The parks built by the Federal League, like Chicago's Weeman Park, survived, becoming landmarks of baseball history. Yet the story of the Federal League remains one of audacity, ambition, and the ultimate gamble. A league that dared to challenge a monopoly, that threatened the status quo, and that reminded the world that even in baseball, fortunes can rise and fall in the span of a season. The Federal League was gone, but its legend endured, a ghost of rebellion in the early days of America's pastime, whispering of what might have been.